supporting you in your dog parenting journey. The Dynamic Dog Owner with Debbie Potter.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Dynamic Dog Owner, the podcast designed to support you, the dog parent, in your dog parenting journey. As you all know, if you're a regular listener, we focus on helping you become the most confident, successful dog parent you can be. This week's episode has been a request, and I do like a requested topic because it makes sure that I am giving you what you want to listen to. So this is actually a request from my sister, who is a dog photographer, so loves dogs, works with dogs, but doesn't have her own dog. And her question is, if you have a family member who doesn't want to get a dog, should you convince them? Should you persuade them to want a dog? Or shouldn't you? And do I think that everybody in the household should be on board with getting a dog before you get one? And how do you kind of manage this conversation? So that's what we're going to be talking about. So a little bit of history, I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning. So my sister has lived with dogs like with growing up. Obviously she lived with me and I grew up with dogs, so did she. She had dogs all of her time growing up at home, but has never had her own dog. She loves using hours when she needs her dog fix, but she doesn't have her own dog because her lifestyle doesn't allow it, because her and her husband travel quite a lot for work. They are in the travel industry, so they're always away, and it wouldn't be fair on them to get a dog. But as life changes in the future, they will probably be slowing down with traveling, and she would like to get a dog, but her husband is not keen, because he had dogs too, growing up, but is less keen as she. So that's kind of like where the story's coming from, or where the content today is coming from. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I think it's a really, really good topic because it's a really common subject that people obviously have to persuade a family member, or one person is more keen than the other. And therefore, a lot of people are going to be going through this. So it may be, obviously, most people listening to the podcast already have a dog, but I know there are a huge portion of people that don't actually have a dog and listen ready for when they are going to get a dog. So if this doesn't apply to you, but you know a family member thinking about getting a dog, send this their way. But equally, you can apply the same advice to getting another dog. And that's kind of where I'm often at with persuading my family to get another dog rather than getting a first dog. And I don't personally, this probably sounds a bit weird, I don't remember ever having this conversation with my husband. I don't remember us discussing whether we would or wouldn't get a dog. I just kind of took it as gospel that we would. I never even crossed my mind to assume we wouldn't. And I mean, it was 20 years ago, 19 years ago, we got our first dog. I don't remember ever having the conversation, but then he kind of just stumbled into our life anyway, because we happened to be at my mum's house when a lady was round and said, do you want the dog? Or we're getting rid of the dog. And I was like, we'll have him. And I don't remember Sam and I ever actually discussing that. I just said, we'll have him. And he didn't say no. So there you go. Sam never grew up with dogs and didn't know any dogs. So it was like a first dog for him. But then this is where our characters are quite complementary, because I'm quite an impulsive person. Yeah, I'll have the dog, no worries. Whereas he would stop and think about things. So we actually help each other out to manage that quite a lot. He helps me stop and think, and I help him to be impulsive. So I don't remember ever having the conversation, but I do see quite a lot of people in training who will say, I didn't really want the dog. Or people go, well, I've finally given in. The family wanted one, I've finally given in. So it is a really common topic. So I think the first things first is we have to understand, if this is you, and you're considering or trying to persuade someone to get a dog, or if you've got a dog and you're trying to persuade them to get a second dog, first things first is we have to kind of take on board everyone else's opinions, and their point of view, and we have to consider it, because there may be lots of different reasons why somebody doesn't actually want a dog, and it may not just be, I don't want one. So I think we need to look at that. Why do people not want one? So if you do and your partner doesn't, or a family member doesn't, parent, child, whoever, why? Because if we understand the reasons why they don't want a dog, we actually have a lot more understanding of their point of view and their situation. And then our argument against getting one can be more tailored to actually address their concerns. Now, obviously, I'm not saying you have to get your own way if you want one, because sometimes it's not right. But I'm assuming people listening to this want one. Equally, if you don't, this might help, but it's got to be the right decision for each family. That's a huge thing. There is no right or wrong. So a few common things I can think of is why people don't. One is that some people are scared of dogs. My mother-in-law is scared of dogs. That's why she doesn't come to my house very often. She's not keen. So if someone has a true fear of dogs, then that can be one reason. You can have that people are concerned about the fact that their house isn't big enough, that the garden's not big enough. Again, valid concerns. You've got the financial implications. People go, we can't afford a dog because they are more expensive than people think. I hate to think about how much mine cost me. I've just had their insurance claims sort of renewals come through, and I'm actually considering whether I'm going to extend Dave's, because his has now gone up to over £100 a month. So I'm currently spending about £250, £220-ish a month on insurance that I never claim on. And I'm going, blimey, that's just insurance. So, I mean, I have 3 dogs, so it's a little bit maybe exasperated in terms of outgoings. But, financial implications, it's a really, really valid reason why people wouldn't want a dog. You've also got the lifestyle implication, because it does affect your life and it does affect what you can do. There is no more impulsive, let's just pop out, because you can't, quite simply. You have to think about who's got the dog, who's looking after the dog, how long are we going to be? You have to think about going on holiday. Do you take the dog with you? Do you not take the dog with you? So there's all of these extra things that come into play that some people obviously will find a bigger issue than others. You've then got I don't want the responsibility. I don't want to have to get up early and walk the dog. I don't want to have to feed it. I don't want to have to train it. So all of these are reasons, some reasons why people might not want to get a dog. And knowing these reasons and understanding them, I think, is really, really important, because then you're seeing each other's perspective. On the flip side, you've also got, why do you want a dog? Because, some people wouldn't understand. If you're the person who doesn't want the dog, you may be kind of going, well, why do you want one? What's so great about them? So you probably also need to think about, why do you want a dog? So that you've got 2 sides of an argument. And obviously, that can be many, many reasons, but we all know the companionship, the fun, the love, etc. So obviously, if someone is absolutely, totally against getting a dog, is it right to push them to get a dog? And my answer would be no, because you have to take on board their point of view. So as I said, before, that if someone's actually scared of dogs, pushing them to get a dog is not going to cure their fear. I've seen this quite a few times, that people have come to training and they've gone, I'm actually scared of dogs. I didn't want the dog, but my family did. It causes so much extra stress and tension in a family. Is it worth it if one person is really, really scared? Obviously, there's all these different reasons, and it is good to know the reasons, but also we need to counteract them a little bit and go, right, well, how can we overcome those issues? So, for example, if someone is really scared, it's not something that just getting a dog is going to fix, because it has, dogs generally, puppies, but you think, oh, cute people, how could they not like a puppy? But puppies bite, puppies jump, puppies nip. Puppies are actually, and when they get the zoomies as well, can actually be quite scary if you are scared of dogs, rather than an older, placid dog who just curls up on the sofa and goes to sleep. There is a huge difference. So people who are scared of dogs, we actually need to look at, rather than just making them get a dog, you actually need to address their fears and go, right, why are you scared of getting a dog? What is the big cause, and actually help them to build confidence in dogs before you force them to get their own, because that's going to help them so much more. And there's so many ways that we can actually overcome fear of dogs, exposure, hypnotherapy. I'm a huge advocate for hypnotherapy. I think it's wonderful. I've had hypnotherapy myself. My family have hypnotherapy, and it is brilliant for turning off those subconscious thoughts. So, there's ways that we can overcome a fear of dogs, but getting one and throwing someone in the deep end is not the answer. Building on confidence around dogs, looking at underlying cause of fear, etc., in the run-up, before making that decision are really, really important. So obviously, that's one of the big situations I would say it's probably not a good idea to cajole them, force them into getting a dog. Other reasons, as we mentioned, like, money, sit down, plan a budget. If there are clear concerns about certain areas, we can counteract it with evidence, research. So, for example, I say money, budget. Do a proper budget. Don't just go off of guesstimated figures. Actually speak to dog owners, speak to people, find out how much things cost. I mean, I don't want to put a figure on it because it wouldn't be accurate, but I know my dogs cost me a lot of money. If I didn't have 3 dogs, I would be a lot better off. That's just what I'm happy to do. I don't think about it because it scares me, because it's very expensive. But that is a real valuable reason. And, it's not just the getting the dog, it's all the other things. It's the unexpected costs of coming with the dog. And it's good to go in with a plan and going, right, can we actually afford this rather than getting a dog? What I often see again is that people spend all their money getting the dog and then they can't actually afford training, or not high quality, but they have to choose a cheaper food because they can't afford the expense. It's not just the expense of running the dog, it's what if something goes wrong. So my eldest dog's currently having fortnightly hydrotherapy, costing me an extra £130 a month, which I'm having to find. Can I go without it? Yes, but is his quality of life good without it? No. So these are the hidden extras. They're going on holiday. You've got to think every time you go on holiday, if you haven't got anyone, friends, family who are going to look after the dog, you've got to budget in a good £500 for dog care for a week when you go on holiday. So all of these extra costs, it's a really good idea to have that budget and plan it and look at all the possibles of what else could be going on. And I think one of the big reasons, as we've kind of highlighted a little bit earlier, is lifestyle, but responsibility. Because again, if you want the dog, great. But if other family members don't, it's likely they're not going to want to. If you persuade them without having had this good conversation, it's unlikely that they're going to want to take part day to day looking after the dogs. And a lot of people go into it thinking, oh, well, when the dog arrives, they'll fall in love with it and then they'll want to do all this stuff to help it, which of course some people do, but a lot of people don't. So I think setting that realistic expectation is actually really important, that if you want the dog and other family members don't, it's going to be your responsibility. Kids, they're not going to actually step up and look after the dog. Rarely. Common practice. We've all done it, I'm sure. Please, can I really, really want. You get it, and after a week, the novelty wears off and you're not interested. I did it as a child with a guinea pig, desperate for this baby guinea pig that I'd met from day old, really cute, wanted it. I think I was about 13. Spent all weekend persuading my dad. Of course, he said yes. Loved the guinea pig for the first year. And then I think I probably got to the age where I discovered boys and was like, I'm not interested. Why do I want to love a guinea pig anymore? And I didn't look after the guinea pig, and my mum had to look after the guinea pig. It was a guinea pig. Not saying it's not as valuable as a dog, but, she was fine looking after it and feeding it. She still reminds me of this fact now, especially when my children say, can we have another animal? I'm like, yes, I know it'll be my responsibility. But it goes with adults too. If you don't want the dog and you're persuaded to get it and you're expected to look after it, naturally, one party is going to either be peed off or disappointed. So setting that realistic expectation of if you want it and the other family members don't, it is going to be your responsibility. It's going to be you walking it and doing everything with it. This is why it's important to have these conversations that we're going to talk about in a sec before you make this decision. Don't rush into it unless everybody is on board. Because if they're not on board, it's going to cause friction, it's going to cause drama. And then obviously everyone lives in resentment. Some people are then annoyed they got the dog, and it can cause a lot of negativity. And yeah, it just doesn't make for a happy household. And obviously you want a happy life, you want to bring a dog into your life. So it's good to have the whole family on board, because then you are splitting workload. You are all taking part. Everybody wants the dog. Everyone is invested in their own way, and each person can take on a little bit of the responsibility, depending on, their level of involvement. At least then everybody wants the dog. No one resents that happening. And everyone will enjoy the dog at their own level, in their own way. But that's kind of already been thrashed out before you get puppy. Now, obviously, if you do force someone into getting a dog, and they weren't necessarily keen on it, what can happen? As I said, you can start to get a little bit annoyed with each other. You can start to resent each other's involvement. You can start to feel quite isolated, because if you have a responsibility and you've got no one to help you, then there's a lot of pressure on you. If you're going to be the one, getting up in the night, feeding the dog, taking the dog out for walks, playing with the dog, training the dog, arranging everything for the dog, naturally you feel it weighed down. And then you're going to get really annoyed with your partner, family member, whoever, because they don't help, but they didn't want it in the first place. So it's kind of setting realistic expectations of what's going to happen. So I do think it's really important that everybody has a consensus, and that way where everyone is at the beginning. Everyone's accepting each part of the care of the dog or the puppy, whatever you're going to get. Obviously, for me, it's now adding extra dogs in, which we seem to have a conversation about this quite often. I know when I want a dog, it's not just about what I want. I have to discuss it with my family. And my kids are always going to say, of course, I want another dog. But they don't have to do anything for it. They don't have to pay for it. They don't do any responsibility. They do the cuddling, and they occasionally give it a brush. They might occasionally go to training, might occasionally give it a treat or something at home. They don't look after them reliably every single day. They're teenagers, and it was never their decision to, I know, yes, they say I want one, but I know they're not going to actually do the work because they're teenagers and life changes. But for me, when I want another dog, obviously I have to discuss it with my husband. I haven't ever just brought a dog home. I have been very good. So obviously I discuss it with my husband, but I also have the discussion with my mum, because it's my mum that helps us out. So if I'm out for a day or a long day or whatever, it will be her that comes and looks after my dogs. If she looks after the family when both my husband and I are at work at weekends, so she's there with my, managing kids and dogs. She's with us a lot. So it's a big responsibility for her if I get another dog too, because I'm expecting her to not look after 3 dogs, but for example, now 4 dogs. And looking after 4 dogs is way harder than looking after 3. So I have to make sure that she's on board. So it's not just necessarily just who's in your home, it's the wider family too, the wider sort of people who are going to be involved in your dog's life. If I was just rushing to get another dog and my mum was really against it, then we've then got resentment of her looking after the dogs and, having that extra responsibility and it becoming too much for her, and then me having to, look at alternatives, which again is all of these consequences that we have to think of before we make that decision. So hence the consensus of everyone saying yes is really, really important, because at least we can say, well, we did discuss this beforehand. You said you were okay with it. If that's changed, that's fine, but we did talk about it. So it's good for everyone to be able to express their opinion, have their opinion, and be respected, most importantly. So when it comes down to actually having these conversations with your partner, your children, your family members, whoever it may be, whoever needs to have this discussion with you, first of all, we need to have the discussions, not just as a casual thing, but as a set down, let's have this conversation. Don't try and do it, when you're both heated or in between tasks in the day or while you're washing up or whatever. Everyone needs to have time to actually sit down and discuss this. So what I would suggest is, if you really, really, really do want this, I'm sure you've probably talked about it already in casual conversation, but say, right, let's have a family meeting. Nothing wrong with a family meeting. And sitting down together and saying, we are going to discuss this, setting a day and a time, be official about it, set like a day and a time, or like after dinner or on Thursday, can I have an hour of everyone's time, and sit and have a chat. So, and tell everyone what the conversation is going to be about, tell everyone to prepare what they want to talk about, so that everyone gets the opportunity to express their thoughts, their opinions, and discuss it as a whole. That way, everyone's ready. No one's being thrown in at the last minute, having to think on the fly and go, oh, I don't know. Go with your facts and figures on how much a dog's going to cost. And be prepared. This first sort of meeting you're going to have as your family meeting, you're not going to make a decision that day, but everyone will have had a chance to talk about it and then go away and think about things and then return. So I would suggest, say, setting a day and time, saying this is what we're going to talk about. I want you all to bring like your pros, your cons, your concerns, and we'll talk about it all. Now, obviously, depending on how big your family is, there might be a lot of voices to be heard. And we want to make sure that everyone has their opinion. So it's really good to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to speak without being talked over. And everyone has the opportunity to ask questions and have our questions answered. So personally, in our house, it's really, really random. We have a talking spoon. We don't actually have a spoon, but we have what we call the talking spoon. Purely because when my kids were younger, they'd all talk over each other, and we'd all be talking, and it would all get a bit chaotic, and they'll be like, "You're not listening to me." So I think once we were at a cafe and we were discussing something, and it was getting a little bit that everyone was talking over each other. I went, right, let's have a talking spoon. So I just picked up a spoon off the table, I think it was like a teaspoon. I went, right, if you've got the spoon, you're allowed to talk. You're not allowed to talk until you pass the spoon over. It's your turn when the spoon comes to you. And we did. That's how we managed it. I think they must have been quite young. They were like, I don't know, 8, 10. Whatever. And we only did it once or twice. And now whenever we're having a discussion and someone, usually my youngest daughter, doesn't feel like she's been listened to, she's like, I've got the talking spoon. And obviously we're like, okay, sorry, we're talking over you. So it's kind of like a code for, you're talking over me, let me speak. So have a talking spoon, let everyone have their turn, and their opportunity to speak and say what they need to say from start to finish without being interrupted. That's a really, really, really valuable thing. Even if you disagree with what the person's saying, don't just talk over them. Make notes and go back and talk to them, address their points when they're finished, so that everyone has the opportunity to talk. And it's not, as I say, there's no rights or wrongs. This isn't an argument. It's just a discussion. And then we can have some then strategic or sort of planned ideas about how we're going to go away, readdress what we've talked about. Because it may give you ideas, it may give you thoughts, it may give you some suggestions about how you can then tackle this and whose concerns are what, and then go away and talk about them. So after you've done that, you've talked through the pros, the cons, you've talked through the benefits of having a dog, the reasons why you don't want a dog. It's almost like a debate, effectively. Everyone knows what they're talking about. You can then go away and research. So if, for example, one person says, well, have you thought about how much this is going to cost? You can go, oh, no, I haven't, but I will go back I'll go and work it out, and then I'll come back to you. And then you can set another family meeting. Because once you've decided you're going to get a dog, it doesn't end there. You've then got to decide, what are we going to get? Are we going to get a puppy? Are we going to get a rescue dog? What breed are we going to get? Girl, boy. So there's loads of decisions here. It's not just that one decision about getting a dog. There's everything else to decide too. So this first initial chat is about airing concerns, pros and cons, getting some information, and then going away, researching, and then coming back and talking to each other. And you can do that as many times as you need to. It may be that you have questions that need to be answered by somebody else, like a professional. If you were to message us and say, we're thinking about getting a dog, can we ask you all these questions? I'd be like, hell yes. Because so many people rush into it without being planned. If people come to me with a million questions before getting a puppy, I'm like, go you. I wish everyone did this much research, because it's really, really good to make sure all this stuff is thrashed out beforehand. So how can we actually make these decisions? So obviously we've got to discuss the costs, the money, the long-term commitment, see where everyone's at, and see who wants to put in what to the equation. So once you've kind of thought about that, think about, can we have a trial run? Is there a friend who's got a dog who needs to care for a week? I will look after your dog while you're on holiday for a week. You then get to practice run it. And then if anyone's got any concerns, you can see how a dog would fit into your life. And whether you'd have the time responsibilities, whether people would step up. Obviously, you've got the novelty factor because it's not yours and it's there for a week. But it's all things that you could start to look at the practical of, putting the routines like feeding and walks and training into your daily life. How much it limits what you want to do. Obviously, the cost isn't going to be there because it's not yours. But the actual lifestyle things, you can practice. You can then set your budget and work out how much all these things cost. You could discuss with your family members who's going to do what responsibility. So who's in charge of this? Who's in charge of that? Generally speaking, we haven't ever written it down, but in my family, everyone has their little role. So for example, I generally am up first because I go to work early. Whoever's up early takes the first dog. Rem doesn't win the garden, takes him out for a wee and comes back. Whoever's home then takes the dogs out for their walk. I generally feed them their breakfast. My husband tends to feed them their dinner. We take it in turns or bits. Everyone has a bit of a day that they're kind of responsible for just because it fits into life that way. You may just casually go with it and say whoever does what, but you may go, right, well, you're in charge of. So for example, with children, you could say you're in charge of giving them 10 minutes of fun training every day. And because kids love to practice tricks and stuff. It could be that you're responsible for meal times. That's your job. And you divide the tasks up. And this is more the practical stuff that you can go through. And that way everyone feels a little bit of responsibility. Everyone has something they're sort of looking forward to doing with them in an area they can sort of perfect. But also you're dividing the tasks up. So all of these things are going to help when you get the dog to ensure that everyone's involved, everyone's got a task, and everyone's got something to do. Now, obviously, once you've kind of decided all of this, don't rush into it then. Once you've had these first discussions, once you've planned, replan it, revisit it to make sure that all of the extra things that come up are discussed and thought about. And it's okay if at the end of this process that you go, actually, okay, it's not for us. Because having a dog isn't for everyone. It is a big responsibility. It is a big commitment. And not just for a year or two. It can be a 15-year commitment, which you've got to go into knowing that you are prepared to give it 15 years. And I look at that, with my first dog, for example, the dog that I said, oh yeah, we'll have him, turned out to be the best dog in the world. But we got him. We didn't even have a house for him to live in. This is how crazy it was. We were renting a house we couldn't have dogs in. So we then had to say, Mum, could you have him for a month or two until we buy our house? So he came to us before we even bought our house. If you think about how our lives changed, we were just a couple who were trying out living together. We then bought our house, got married, had babies. We were very, the 21-year-old me when we first got Leo versus the 33, I don't remember. 33 I would have been when he died. Very, very different. And that was a hell of a lot of responsibility to take on at 21, to be fair. But obviously I'd lived with dogs all my life and I knew I wanted him and I was used to living with dogs. So it wasn't really a big decision. It was a bigger decision for Sam. But life changes. So he was 15 when he died, but we had him since he was 2.5. So we had him 12.5 years. So that's about right. So 21-year-old me versus 33. In that time, our lives changed very much. We went through a lot of changes in terms of, becoming a family, having children, all of those things. But the dog obviously was never it was never a question of would we keep him, would we not? But if your life does change significantly, you've got a long commitment to this dog that you're going to get. So it's really important to make the decision and make the right decision for you and your family. And even if, you can still disagree. You can agree to have a dog and everyone be on board. You can agree to not have a dog, but you can agree to say, right, well, I'm getting a dog. It's 100% my responsibility. I don't expect you to do anything with it. that's a decision too, but it's just making sure that everyone going into it has got that clear expectation so that no one's disappointed and there's not any family upset around the decisions and resentment in the future when that person doesn't, take on board any responsibility. So, is it right to convince a family member to get a dog? No. We can't make them, we can't cajole them, we can't force them, but we can have good conversations to make sure that everybody is on board with the topic. Everybody is at least understanding their role and happy with the decision that is being made, or at least has the opportunity to express themselves, because it will make your life so much easier if you have all of this decided beforehand. Hopefully, this has made it useful. Hopefully it's useful to you. Whether it is, that someone you know is getting a dog, send this over to them, because it'd be really beneficial if they're in that should we, shouldn't we stage. If you're thinking about getting a second, third, fourth, fifth dog, hopefully it's useful to help with the family discussions around that too. And obviously, as I said, we do have a webinar. It's called So You're Getting a Puppy, and it kind of talks about the things about the ins and outs of getting and the responsibility and the bits you may not have thought about. So shout if you want a copy of that. And do reach out to a trainer if you want some help or some mediation or some help with making these decisions, or you have questions that you need someone to answer for you, because we would, and I'm sure most other trainers would love to hear from you if you were in this planning stage, because obviously it shows you're really committed to making the right decision, which is really, really, really important. Hopefully, you found it useful. Thank you for listening. And I hope your decision making goes well.
Thank you for listening to The Dynamic Dog Owner with me, Debbie Potter. See you next time.